So let's talk some more about bugging out. And you basically have two choices, and you're either going to shelter in place and you're going to deal with the situation where you're at in your neighborhood, city, town, wherever, or you're going to have to leave. And nobody can really tell you what to do. You have to make that decision because there's so many variables that would influence it, that decision, that's going to have to be left up to the person to make the call. So I can give you a couple of tips if you do decide to bug out and you do decide to go to a national forest or public land. And in part one, I already mentioned that it's a very controversial subject, and how I think it's very important if you do decide to go to a national forest, for example, to get there early and get out of the city just as fast as you possibly can. Get up to the area you want to go and just set up camp. So the first step for the novice is he's going to have to think short term. And I would suggest just kind of think about the first 2 weeks as a camping trip. You're going to get acclimatized, you're going to get used to your situation. And so have camping supplies and make sure you have food, water, the right clothing and footwear, and of course some type of a shelter, fire making ability, things of that nature. Just like you'd, as I said, just like you'd do if you were going camping. Now, the important thing is if you want to survive long term is you're going to have to think long term. And that means you're going to have to sit down and make a list of what you might need. And that's all going to be dependent on the area you're going to be in. If it's going to be colder and there's no possibility of farming, then you're going to have to think about a different lifestyle than you would if you're in a warmer climate and you want to take seeds and fertilizer and pesticides and different things that would help you get going initially and start growing crops long term as a homesteader. So wherever you go, if it's remote, you're going to probably want some topo maps. Off the top of my head, I'll rattle off a few things, and it's by no means conclusive, but I'd certainly want a compass. I'd want a chainsaw, handsaw, axe, shovel, and other tools. If I was going to do farming, I'd want basic farming implements at least. Firearms, of course. Rolls of plastic for waterproofing, setting up a permanent shelter, gathering water, lining a small pond. Plastic is a great bug out item, and a lot of people neglect to think about that. You're going to want toiletries, you're going to want laundry detergent. I think also it's very important, and I mentioned it before, but bags of salt to help preserve meat and to just help preserve you as well. As human beings, we need salt. Salt might become as valuable as gold again. You want a survival library. You'll want a radio. Maybe you'll even want a ham radio if you care. If you have the money, that can get a little expensive, but there are some cheaper options you can look into. I would recommend a small wood stove if you're going to be somewhere where it gets cold. At least initially, that'll help you get set up, and you'll be able to have that in a makeshift shelter or some type of wiki up, for example. I would say, think long and hard about any kind of homestead items you might need, and also manuals to help you if you don't understand homesteading very well. As I said before, I'm making these first videos for beginners, and I'm getting into some complicated territory here, where you're going to have a skill set, but that's something you should probably be thinking about. The rule of thumb is basically the more items you can bring to sustain yourself long term, the better off you're going to be. If you have to walk out with practically nothing from a city, you're going to need to have a serious survival skill set if you intend to live more than a year. In a situation, and we're talking about a total grid down, without rule of law, shit hit the fan. If it gets that bad and you don't have anything but just maybe a bug out bag, you're going to have some serious skills. And then so what you're going to have to do is just practice acquiring a certain skill set, and that could take a couple of years to do, and maybe even then some. So if you think you might have to walk out of the city like some refugee, then one of the things I do is suggest you cache some gear and supplies beforehand along the way to your final destination. And that's going to be really important. Just get the basics if that's all you can afford. Now, I'll talk more about, in a future video, I'll talk more about a bug out plan that I helped a family member develop to get out of Phoenix and into a better location where he could acquire the necessary game and fish and wild edibles to eat for survival. And finally, I'll just walk you up here. And my final suggestion is just learn some of the wild plants in your area. This one, for example, is called the fern bush. And the Indians used to use this for medicinal purposes, stomach ache, for example. And wherever location you're going to be at, just start learning what the natural medicinals are, the natural edibles. And even if you just start with 10, that will greatly increase your odds of survival. If you could just get under your belt 10 of the most important wild plants of wherever you're going to go, and take a camping trip and get used to camping a little bit and get used to identifying these plants. And if you have to, maybe enlist the help of somebody who will help guide you with the medicinal plants, or at least go to a farm, or somebody who's an herbalist, or somebody who is perhaps growing these wild plants right on their property, and learn to identify those plants. So that's it basically for now. I'll do another report probably from the rim of the Grand Canyon, and we'll talk about how to get out of the city alive and in one piece and get out up into an area where you'll have a much better chance of survival. So we'll talk to you later. Take care.